Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka nabiyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajmain. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome, brothers and sisters, to another installment of our weekly segment, Analyzing the Address, in which we revisit the khutbah and talk about it in a little bit additional detail. Also offer you the opportunity, if you so choose, to provide any feedback and ask any questions you may have about the khutbah. And the khutbah yesterday was actually the completion of a series that we started a few weeks back entitled The Paths to Certainty. And it was actually the sixth and final installment in that series. And yesterday we looked at the impediments, avoiding the impediments to faith and the elements which erode it. And at the outset, we talked about the goal of these sermons, the why. Why have we been doing this and dedicating so many sermons to this topic? And we mentioned that there were a few goals. We mentioned that one of the goals was to remind us of the tools at our disposal to protect ourselves and our youth from doubting in the first place. The tools at our disposal, which would allow us in our youth to rid ourselves of doubt should we experience it. But the very first goal that we mentioned, and the most important one, was the goal of reminding ourselves of just how precious faith is and how worthy it is of being protected and how important it is for us to exert, all efforts and all resources to protect our faith. And I just want to digress here on this point. Brothers and sisters, as believers, if we're going to achieve spiritual success, if we're going to be successful in the hereafter and use this life to be successful in the hereafter, then we have to be able to recognize what is truly precious, what is really important, what deserves our attention, and what is worthy of being valued and prioritized. And we see this a lot in the Sunnah of the Prophet. The Prophet is teaching us through his own example and through his beautiful statements what the priorities should be, where our priorities should be. And I'll give an example. There are many examples, but in order not to spend too much time on this topic or this subject, I'll just give one example. And that example comes to us from the hadith collected by Tirmidhi, rahimahullah ta'ala, authority Abd'Llah ibn Mas'ud, who he mentioned that the Prophet ﷺ, he had a straw mat that he used to lie on. And when the companions would come and visit him after him taking a nap or after him having reclined on this mat, they would notice that he would rise from this straw mat with the impressions of the mat in his bare back. It was just clear that this was a very rough and coarse and calloused surface for the Prophet to lie on. It was not comfortable by any means, and it was actually hurting him because it was leaving these impressions and these red marks, etc., in his back. So Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, he mentioned that he and some of the other companions, upon observing this, they said, "O Messenger of Allah, would you allow us to get you a more comfortable mattress? Would you allow us to purchase for you something which it won't leave these marks and it'll be more comfortable for you?" To which the Prophet ﷺ, he replied. He said, "Mali وللدنيا ما أنا في الدنيا إلا كراكب استظل تحت شجرة ثم راح وتركها." The Prophet responds and he says, "Why?" He says, "What am I to this world? I am not in the world except like a rider who briefly paused on his journey under the shade of a tree and then continued his journey, leaving the tree behind him." So what is the Prophet telling us in a roundabout way? That this is just not a priority. The mattress that I lie on is not a priority. I need to be worrying about things which are more important. These are material things. I need to be worried about the spiritual things. He's teaching us through his own example that that's where our head needs to be, where our mind needs to be. And there are many examples in our present context where we are showing that our mind is in the right place, our priorities are in the right place, especially when it comes to putting the spiritual things above and beyond or giving them precedence over the material things. So for example, it's very common. Many of us are parents, we have kids, we love our kids, and we want our kids to be successful. And unfortunately, our measure of success is, again, it's material. And so you'll have a parent who's constantly on their child about school, about study, asking them about, assignments, asking them about their grades, asking them about school in general, telling them that they should take this course, they should take this AP class, it'll look better on their resume for college, they need to be doing this, they need to enroll in that, they need to get this score on the SATs, they need to find someone who can tutor them and help them get a better score, etc. They're emphasizing that. And those same parents, many of them rarely, if ever, ask their child about prayer. What grade did you get? I want to see your report card. Why'd you get a B instead of an A? Why'd you get an A- instead of an A+? But they'll rarely ask their child, did you pray today? Did you pray Dhuhr? Did you pray Asr? Rarely wake that child up for Fajr, but they'll wake that child up to study for a big history exam. Where's the priorities? Where are the priorities? Not in the right place. Another example, people who, people are working and earning and constantly evaluating where they are in their careers, where they are in their company. Can they climb the corporate ladder? Can they get a promotion? Evaluating their financial situation, taking account of their financial accounts. But do these same people put the same amount of time, invest the same amount of time and energy in taking account of their spiritual accounts? Where are they with Allah? Do they make this muhasabah? Take account of themselves. Another example is with respect to communities. You have communities which will invest large sums of money into buildings, masajid. You have communities who will build these huge mega church style masajid and Islamic centers, multi-purpose room, banquet hall, gyms, schools, classrooms, huge prayer hall, offices, adjacent offices, you name it, they've got it, and no imam. No imam. And I'll give one other example that's a little bit personal. As I recall, in one of the communities that I lived in, worked in, there was a young brother who I had the honor, the pleasure of mentoring, who was interested actually in studying Islam. Basically seriously dedicating his life to studying Islam, or at the very least, pursuing an actual secular career, but also alongside that, pursuing Islamic knowledge and becoming more knowledgeable and active in learning and teaching Islam. And his parents were absolutely against it. And they were opposed to it, and he himself struggled with wanting to obey his parents, but also wanting to, become more knowledgeable of his religion, more committed to his religion, and be in service of his religion. So he was torn between obeying them and trying to get closer to his Lord through this learning and studying. And I can understand, part of me can understand where the parents are coming from. Because the parents are worried about their child from a material standpoint. They're worried about their child because imams are typically devalued, they're typically undercompensated, and they are highly expendable. They're easily discarded. And so there's a lot of a lack of job security. And as a parent, you don't want that for your child. And I can understand where the parents were coming from. But if you look at these considerations in light of what we've been talking about in this, this opening segment, all of these considerations of the parents and concerns are material. And from the spiritual aspect, if they were looking at it from the spiritual side, what better occupation, what better thing for their child to do for his spiritual side than him to study Islam and to teach it to others? What more likely means is there for him to enter into paradise? And that's what a parent should really, at the bottom, we all want our children to be doctors and engineers and have good careers and be wealthy and happy and prosperous in this world. That's nice. But what we really, really should care about, if our priorities in the right place, is that our children go to paradise. They don't go to hellfire. That they don't suffer in the next life. That's what we should care about. And if they're looking at it from that perspective, if they really are prioritizing the right things, what could be better than their child to learn deen and teach it to others? The Prophet said in the hadith of Uthman, he said, خيركم مَنْ تَعَلَّمَ الْقُرْآنَ وَعَلَّمَهُ. He said the best of you are those who learn the Quran and teach it to others. And he told Ali radiallahu anhu in the hadith of in the hadith of Sahal ibn Sa'ad, he told him, لَأَنْ يَهْدِيَ اللَّهُ بِكَ رَجُلًا وَاحِدًا خَيْرٌ لَكَ مِنْ حُمُرٍ النَّعَمِ. He said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would guide through you a single person. It would be better for you in the hereafter, from a spiritual point of view, it would be better for you than the most precious form of wealth. And so I give all these examples, and I say all this to say, brothers and sisters, that our priorities are getting mixed up. Our priorities are in the wrong place, and we need to reprioritize. We need to readdress, revisit our priorities, and make sure that we are concerned more about the spiritual than the material. And the most important spiritual priority is our faith, our iman. Where are we in terms of our faith? And that's why these khutb, this series of khutb was so important, because that was the main goal, to make us realize and wake up from our ghafla, from our heedlessness, and realize faith is so important and we're not taking care of it, safeguarding it, protecting it the way that we should. So then after that, we mentioned that true faith is, in many regards, it's like a strong, healthy tree. And we said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says as much in the Quran. And we mentioned the ayah where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَلَمْ تَرَ كَيْفَ ضَرَبَ اللَّهُ مَثَلًا كَلِمَةً طَيِّبَةً كَشَجَرَةٍ طَيِّبَةٍ أَصْلُهَا ثَابِتٌ وَفَرْعُهَا فِي السَّمَاءِ. Do you not see how Allah provides a parable? A good word, the testimony of faith, is like a good tree. Its root is firm in the heart, and its branches, the good deeds done by the believer, are in the sky, rising up to be accepted and rewarded by Allah. And we talked about how this tree of faith, Allah is likening faith to a tree. And this tree of faith, this metaphorical tree of faith, is planted where? In the heart. And like a real tree, if it is properly cared for and it is nurtured, the more firmly rooted it becomes in the heart. And what we meant by properly cared for is that a person actively observes what the scholars have traditionally called asbab ziyadat al-iman. Ziyadat al-iman. And asbab ziyadat al-iman. The factors that cause faith to increase and grow. That basically, how do we properly care for our faith? How do we nurture it? How do we water it? How do we weed it? We do that through doing the things which the scholars of Islam have called asbab ziyadat al-iman. Al-iman. I don't know why I keep saying imam, right? I guess imam is on my mind. Al-asif. Ziyadat al-iman, right? That we do the things that will make our faith grow and increase. And there's lots of them, and we mentioned some of them in the previous khutbah. That a lot of the paths to certainty are also, they also double as the causes for iman to what? To grow and increase. They are almost synonymous. They are the same thing. And so, for example, one of them is seeking beneficial knowledge, learning the deen. The more we learn about the deen, the more we will become convinced, and our faith in Islam will be increased, and our faith in Allah will be increased. Reading and reflecting upon the Quran, upon Allah's words, because in His words are what? Are the things that will make our iman increase, will become certain. This cannot be except the truth. It couldn't come from anything but a divine source. Knowing Allah and becoming intimately familiar with His names and attributes. Knowing the Messenger of Allah, His life and His character. Thoughtful reflection upon creation, everything around us. Knowing the virtues of Islam. Exerting ourselves in doing good deeds and avoiding evil. These are all examples of asbab ziyadat al-iman. The things that will cause our faith to increase and grow. And these are the things that we have to be doing, actively observing and engaging in to do what? To properly care for our faith. And so now we have to look at these. We mentioned like 7 sabat. We have to hold ourselves up to light these things. How much of these things am I doing on a daily basis? How much time do I spend every day learning my deen? Reading a book of seerah, picking up a book of fiqh, picking up a book of aqidah, picking up a book of tafsir, and contemplating. How much time? And you have to be honest with yourself. This is what we talked about earlier about al-muhasabah, taking ourselves to account. If a person isn't spending any time learning his deen, and he's learning other things besides his deen, then how is that going to affect the iman, that tree of iman in his heart? Is it going to grow? Is it going to prosper? Is it going to flourish? How much time do we spend reading the Quran? Every day. Do you make time every day? Even if it's one ayah. Oh, I don't have time. You don't have time for one ayah? 24 hours in a day. You don't have time for one ayah from Allah's words? And how is that going to affect the tree of Iman in your heart if you don't read Allah's words? You don't read the book of Allah. Knowing, contemplating, reflecting upon Allah and His names and attributes. The Prophet ﷺ. When's the last time any one of us read the seerah? Contemplated the seerah? Again, these are all examples of things that we need to be doing actively. On a regular basis to do what? To feed, to nurture, to properly care for the tree of faith in our heart. Then on the other side, we said that if the tree of faith is not properly cared for, if it's deprived of essential nutrients, if it's exposed to toxins and pollution, it will become weak and it may even shrivel up and die altogether. The light of faith can actually be extinguished, and we'll talk about more of that shortly. And so when we talk about the other side of it, not properly caring for faith, then we're talking about what the scholars have traditionally called asbab nuqsan al-iman. The things that cause faith to decrease and dwindle. We need to avoid those things. We need to avoid those hazards, but are we avoiding them? Especially if we're not doing asbab ziyadat al-iman, the things that will cause iman to grow, we certainly cannot expose our faith in that circumstance to the things that will cause it to decrease and dwindle. Because the tree doesn't have the things that will protect it from the harmful things, and we're exposing the harmful things. That makes the iman even more vulnerable and even more likely to what? To be lost. The light of iman to be extinguished. And in the khutbah, we gave 3 examples of these dwindlers of faith, these weakeners of faith. We talked about sins, we talked about ignorance, we talked about shubuhat. But that's not the end all of it. That was an exhaustive list. That was not an exhaustive list of these iman weakeners. So you have others like heedlessness, al-ghafla, where we're just like walking around like zombies, groping through, stumbling through life and not really paying attention to what's going on. Not really attentive to the things that we're doing, the things that we're saying, the things that we're allowing ourselves to believe, which are harming us. We're not paying attention. We're just, like I said, stumbling through life. Al-i'rad, which is stubborn dismissal of the truth. Where when we don't like something, we just, whatever, I don't want to hear that, I don't care. Just i'rad. Becoming intoxicated and overly influenced by worldly pleasures. We care too much about dunya. We consume too much dunya. That weakens our faith and makes us more connected to the material than what? The spiritual. We talked about that a little earlier. How our priorities get mixed up. Because why? Because we become intoxicated with the dunya. And just want more and more. And we need to have this and I got to have that. And if I have this, for example, if I have this phone, as soon as they come out with another, I got to have that one. Right? I just need to have the biggest and the best and the latest and the greatest of this dunya. But not the latest and greatest and the best of the deen. And also the influence of our environment and the companions and the company that we keep. All these things can do what? Can take our iman and decrease it, and even sometimes it can what? Extinguish it totally. So these factors can cause, as we said, iman to dwindle, to decrease, and continue to erode our faith away until none of it remains. And till the light of faith is totally extinguished, as we said. And Imam Al-Awza'i, rahimahullah ta'ala, he talked about this in one of his athar, one of his statements. Imam Al-Awza'i, rahimahullah ta'ala, he was asked, he said, Al-Iman, he was asked, Al-Iman a-yazid? He was asked, faith, does it increase? فقال رحمه الله تعالى نعم حتى يكون كالجبال. He said, yes, of course, until it is strong and elevated, like the mountains. Then it was said to him, قِيلَ لَهُ أَيَنْقُصْ? And does it decrease? And he replied, rahimahullah ta'ala, نَعَمْ حَتَّى لَا يَبْقَ مِنْهُ شَيْءٍ. He said, yes, it can decrease until none of it remains. And this echoes the sentiment of a Shafi'i that we mentioned in the khutbah. Al-Imam Shafi'i, we mentioned in the khutbah that he said, Al-Imanu qawlun wa amal yazidu bil-ta'a wa yanqusu bil-ma'asiyah. He said, faith is both word and deed. It's not something you just say. It's also actions that you perform. That's also faith. As-salat is faith. As-siyam is faith. Al-hajj is faith. Saying a good word, smiling, in the face of a believer is faith. These are all faith. And he went on to say, يَزِيدُ بِالطَّاعَةِ, it increases with acts of obedience, وَيَنْقُصُ بِالْمَعْصِيَةِ, and it decreases when we commit sins. And this is something, brothers and sisters, the reality of faith being something which increases and decreases according to what our deeds, what we allow ourselves to believe, what we allow ourselves to say, and what we allow ourselves to do. This is something which Ahl Sunnah has agreed upon, the Sunni Muslims, and the early Muslims were actively spoke of this, in their conversations and in their addresses, etc. This is something which the Sunni Muslims had believed in historically, and the people who disbelieve in the increase and decrease have been labeled by them as heretics, people who have false beliefs and innovated and heretical ideas about Islam. But in the course of our discussion of the three decreasers and dwindlers of Iman that we mentioned, we talked about ignorance, and we mentioned the statement of the poet in which he said, عرفت الشر لا للشر ولكن لتواقيه ومن لم يعرف الشر وقع فيه. He said, I learned of evil not for evil's sake, but rather so that I could avoid it. For he who does not know evil is bound to fall into it. Brothers and sisters, if we understand the beautiful lines of poetry of this poet, we'll realize that we have to talk about and teach some topics that some people might prefer to go untaught. Topics which may offend their delicate sensibilities. Topics which, when they're talked about, may hit a nerve and make some people feel uncomfortable, because why? You're putting your hand, as they say in Arabic, you're putting your hand on the jarh. You're putting the hand on the part that hurts, right? You're touching something that I'm sensitive about. Why? Perhaps because I'm involved in that. Perhaps because I do that, or someone that I know and care about is engaged in that thing that you're saying that we shouldn't do, or they're not doing that thing that you're saying that we should do, etc. But if you understand what the poet is saying, you understand we have to talk about these things. We can't leave these things, we can't let these things go unsaid, untaught, etc. That the imams and the teachers of Islam and the people who are responsible for guiding the ummah, they have an obligation, they are duty bound to say, for example, that certain things are haram. For example, they have to tell us, especially here in America, in the West, they have to tell us that Halloween is haram, Thanksgiving is haram, Christmas is haram. They have to say that not because they want to be the haram police, not because they want to rain on people's parade. They have to say that because Muslims, if they aren't told that, will practice these things, will do these things which are wrong. They have to tell us, what does Islam say about LGBTQ? What does Islam say about democracy, the Western political system? What does Islam say about some of the erroneous opinions propagated and promoted by some of these celebrity imams? They have to tell us this not because they have a desire to say things which will make us uncomfortable or make us upset or disappoint us or rain on our parade, as we said. They're saying this because we need to know these hazards, these things which are harmful to our faith, so that we can avoid them. They're saying that because they care. And we gave the example in the khutbah of a person, of a blind person. When we don't know our religion, when we lack the basic requisite knowledge of our religion, aqidatan wa manhaja, in terms of what we're supposed to believe and how we're supposed to behave. When we don't know that, what are we like? We said that is like a blind person walking along a path riddled with hazards. There are ditches. There are thorny bushes. There are tar pits. There are all these things that, if he were to fall into them, he would be seriously hurt, if not killed. And that's what the person who lacks knowledge, that's what they're like. They can't see the perils, so how can they avoid them? And so the person who, the imam or the scholar or the teacher, the spiritual leader, he's calling out to that blind person and saying, hey, watch out. Watch out for that tar pit. Watch out for that ditch. Watch out for that thorny bush. Watch out for that glass. You don't have any shoes on. You're going to cut up your feet. And he's saying that why? Because he wants to be the haram police? Because he wants to rain on his parade? Because he wants to keep him from just enjoying his walk? No, he doesn't want to see him hurt. And the imam, the scholar, he doesn't want to see people hurt spiritually. He doesn't want to see people punished. He doesn't want to see people face the wrath of Allah. That's why he calls. And so we, the recipients of this nasiha, this advice, we should be so happy to receive it, because why? When we receive this advice and we receive this caution and we're told, hey, don't do this because it'll hurt your iman, it'll hurt your chances to get to paradise, it'll hurt your chance to get to the highest levels of paradise, we should be happy to receive it. Why? Because it's like a person who's blind being given eyesight, being given the ability to see after being deprived of it. But unfortunately, some people, they want to be blind. They believe in what they call blissful ignorance. Ignorance is bliss. It's good not to know. That way you can do things that you shouldn't do, and do harmful things, consume harmful things, engage in harmful things, but you don't know it's harmful. Right? They would rather be blind than be guided aright. They would rather fall into the perils than rather be what? Protected from them. It's unfortunate. It's sad. Then we went on and we focused at the end on the third and final weakener of faith, if you will, that we focused on in the khutbah, and that was a shubuhat, which we translated as spacious arguments, dubious assertions, basically things that resemble the truth but are untrue, things that make us think that they're true but they're really not true. And we mentioned how these shubuhat are everywhere in our day and age, and we mentioned some places where they are, and that we are constantly exposed to. For example, we mentioned social media platforms, we mentioned news media, we mentioned the World Wide Web, and we mentioned educational institutions attended by our children, our youth, and our young people. And we didn't mention, but unfortunately it is one of the sources of these shubuhat, is the manabir, the pulpits of some of the masajid. That some of the pulpits are places where these shubuhat are propagated. And we've talked about this previously. I won't spend a lot of time on it now, but we have to be careful. Unfortunately, there are even some people who are from our religion, and they are respected people. They're even considered authorities in our religion, who are also propagating these shubuhat. So we have to be careful. We have to be careful even from them. And we have to scrutinize things that they're saying and things that they're telling us and teaching us, and hold the things that they say up to the light of the Quran and Sunnah, as understood by the early Muslims, as agreed upon by the scholars throughout history. If it agrees with it, alhamdulillah. If it doesn't, then what? We need to be careful accepting it, believing it, practicing it. Why? Because the Prophet warned, he said, the thing I fear for you the most are those scholars who will misguide you. That said, in the khutbah, we focused on one of the sources of these shubuhat, and that was schools, secular schools. And obviously, our children have to go to school. It's something that they have to go to school. They have to learn. And we have to put them in school. And if you're in a community where there's no Islamic school, then you're muttar. But the sad thing that I find is that people, even if they're in a community where there's no Islamic school, they put their children in public school, and they don't do it. They do it with no hesitation. They don't even do it with a sense of being, uncomfortable. There's no karaha. They're not like doing it and holding their nose. They're not doing it and feeling, a sense of what? Of disgust, disdain, disappointment. I hate to have to do this. No, they willfully do that. Perhaps it's because they don't realize, they don't recognize that, yeah, this is dangerous. I'm putting my child in an environment where they're going to be bombarded with shubuhat. We mentioned some of those shubuhat in the khutbah. They're going to be bombarded with things that make them question their faith. Our children have to go to school. We understand that. But if they have to go to school, we have to also understand they're going to be exposed to these shubuhat, and we have to do what we can to inoculate them, to insulate them, to protect them. And a question we have to ask ourselves as parents, are we doing that? Are we surrounding our children with bubble wrap to protect them from what? From these shubuhat? Are we putting a force field around our kids to protect them from being influenced by these beliefs and these ideas and these philosophies, which will make them start to question their faith, to even become vehement opponents of their faith? And we've seen that. We've seen kids who not only do they not believe or have serious doubts, but they come to the masjid, they come to the Islamic community, and they start to argue with other kids to convince them, hey man, there's some holes in Islam. There's some holes that can be poked in Islam. Look at this, and have you thought about this? And my teacher was telling me that. They're doing that. And so, brothers and sisters, we have to realize that if we're going to do that, if we're going to put our children in these schools, and it doesn't matter if we're not talking about just about grade school and middle school and high school, we're talking about even what? Secular universities. If we're going to do that, what are we doing to offset, to inoculate, to insulate, to put a force field around our kids and protect them from doubt? Are we teaching them? Are we instilling in them the love of Allah, azamat the belief and certainty in the deen? All those things we talked about, asbab wa ziyad al-iman, the things that will cause iman to what? To grow and increase and become firmly rooted. Are we doing that, especially as they grow up and prepare to go off to university? In those tender years, are we doing that? And many of us are not doing it, or we're not doing it enough. And so then we closed the khutbah by mentioning that faith is the most precious thing that we have and the most precious gift that we can give to our kids. And this is something which has been emphasized over and over in Islam. So for example, the Prophet said in the one hadith, or the Prophet indicated that faith is the key to paradise. If you have faith, it's your one-way ticket to Al-Jannah. So he said in the one hadith, he said this many a hadith, but one of them is the hadith in which he said, "Man qala la ilaha illallah, wa anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, wa anna Isa Abd'Llah wa Rasulihi, wa kalimatuhu alqaha ila Maryam wa ruhun min, wal jannata haq wal nara haq, adkhalahu Allah al jannata ala makan bil amal." So the Prophet said, whoever mouths the word, the kalima of iman, la ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, whoever embraces iman and has faith in the oneness of Allah and the Prophet of Muhammad, and he also believes in the prophethood and messengership of Isa, and that he is the word of Allah and a spirit from him, that paradise is true and hellfire is true. Allah will enter him into paradise despite whatever he did of deeds. Key to paradise is what? Is faith. He also told us that the paradise is also the thing that will prevent people from going to hell. Person has true faith, inshallah, he won't go to hell. He said in the hadith of Itban, he said, فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ حَرَّمَ عَلَى النَّارِ مَنْ قَالَ لَا إِلَهَ اللَّهِ يَبْتَغِي بِذَلِكَ وَجْهَ اللَّهِ. Indeed, Allah has prohibited hellfire from touching, from claiming the person who has true faith. He also told us, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran tells us that the source of security, the primary source of security, not just in this world, but in the hereafter, security from hell, is faith. And he also told us that the primary source and cause for a person to be guided is faith. The number one thing that's going to cause us to have these two gifts, these most important things, security in this world and the hereafter, and guidance in this world and the hereafter, is faith. He said, الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَلَمْ يَلْبِسُوا إِيمَانَهُمْ بِظُلْمٍ أُولَٰئِكَ لَهُمُ الْأَمْنُ وَهُمْ مُهْتَدُونَ. He says, those who believe and do not mix their faith with shirk, with idolatry and polytheism, أُولَٰئِكَ لَهُمُ الْأَمْنُ, those will enjoy security in this world and the hereafter, and they will be the rightly guided. And last but not least, and certainly not, when I say last, I mean last thing I'm going to mention, but not the last thing that we could say about the proofs that Iman is the most precious thing that we have. But the last thing I'll mention is that there will be some believers, some people with faith, who because of their sins, they will enter hellfire. They will be punished. But because of their faith, they won't remain there forever. And faith is something that prevents a person from remaining in hell forever, even if they enter it. May Allah protect us all from entering it. The Prophet said in the hadith, Allah will say on the day of judgment, أخرج من النار من عنده أدنى حبة خردل من الإيمان. He will say to the angels, take out of the fire the person who has the least Habbata khardal, the least mustard seed's weight of faith. Faith is precious. Faith is going to save us. Faith is going to give us security. Faith is going to enter us into paradise and protect us from the hellfire. Faith is precious. It's the most precious thing we have. And I'm going to close now as we close in the khutbah. So if faith is this precious, if it's this important, if it's this beneficial, this significant, then we need to protect and preserve it. Go to great lengths to protect and preserve it, like we go to great lengths to protect and preserve other precious things. Person has something valuable, it's on a lock and key. They buy these big safes and have them bolted to their floor in their house. And they put their valuables, their jewels, and their diamonds, and their gold, and their cash, they put them in those safes because it's precious, because it means something. They value it. Are we doing the same thing for our faith? Are we? This is the question we have to ask. This is the question we've been trying to ask or allude to for 6 khutbahs, 6 sermons, talking about the path of certainty. Critical, important topic that unfortunately we didn't do it justice. We just scratched the surface, but it's something that'll open up discussions for us as individuals to sit with ourselves and contemplate our own circumstance, our own reality. Sit with our households. What are we doing? Are we living right? Are we preparing ourselves for the day when life will end and the next life will begin? This is what this whole series of sermons has been about. I hope Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has opened our minds, our hearts, and our ears to this topic and made us people who will get more serious about protecting ourselves from doubt, increasing our own certainty, and that of our young people, our youth, who are the future of Islam. And with that, we'll bring today's session to a close. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as always, to bless you, to bless your houses and your spouses, to bless your health and your wealth, to bless you and make you blessed wherever you may be. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as always, to make us from those who listen to the talk and follow the best of it. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us from those who He teaches beneficial knowledge and allow us to truly benefit from that knowledge by making us from those who put it into practice. Ameen, ameen, ya Rabbal Alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa barak on Nabina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.